Good morning. You ready for the new year? Yeah, me too, me too. So we got a picture coming up here. Had a video I wanted to show you. We just could not make it happen. So there was some legality involved in actually showing it. And against my better judgment, we decided not to show it. Yeah, you heard that correctly. Okay, moving on. So here's a picture of it. But this commercial came out in 1993. And I remember shortly after this came out, I was standing in a Wendy's parking lot in Harlan, Kentucky. And I'm standing there about to go in, and I'd just seen this commercial. So as I'm going to go into the door, I see a sign on the door that says, "Now accepting cards." And I remember being in that moment, in that culture, in that region, in that time, and feeling like that was an earth-shaking move. Like all of a sudden the earth moved and everything was not stable anymore. And if you can remember back, over 30 years ago now, this commercial, there's just a couple of great spots in it where they're interviewing people who are actually in Burger King and they're getting their food. Some are in line, some already have their food. They go over to this one table. There's a business guy there who's you can tell that he's a very savvy business guy. He's got the suit on and he's just there at this fast food place. And they're like checking in with the cards, and it's like, well, I just hope it doesn't, clog up the system. And they have to call New York and situate all this stuff or whatever, because when I want a Whopper, I want it now. And he's being very serious in this moment. And this goes to this other table, and this gal, she's younger, she's like, I just think it's really unfortunate that if you have to use a card to get a $3 burger, what's the world coming to? And then it goes to this other guy, and he's like, yeah, I get cash back, so I'm going to use it all the time, and in about a couple of years, I'll be able to buy a truck. So I'm like, okay. And then it goes to this other customer, and they're like, yeah, it's just not going to work around here. It's really going to cause chaos in the lines. This is really going to make buying a burger a hazard. And I'm thinking, wow, today, have you been to Target or Kroger or Walmart or Burger King or Wendy's lately? How many of you have tapped your card and you're gone? So I was thinking about that. Times have changed. And that quote that you've probably seen on social media, you've read somewhere, maybe someone sent it to you. It's so true. The world that you and I and a lot of us in this room grew up in, it just no longer exists. Times have changed. And the only thing that we can kind of count on is that cliche that the only thing that's really constant is the concept of change. It's inevitable. And what I've learned being a pastor over the years is that sometimes change, it's difficult. And you've got difficulties in life. But what I've learned is that a lot of times when you've got difficulties and you've got change and those things come together, it's not that the change creates difficulties in terms of like destructive tendencies or destructive details. It's something similar to standing in a Wendy's parking lot thinking, wait a minute, what does this actually mean? The concept of change can create a little instability, and in doing so, change itself can feel, or you and I can perceive as if the change itself is making life difficult. Now, that's what's happening in a book in the New Testament we call Colossians. And there's just a short couple of sentences in Colossians, like near the end of the chapter 1. So if you'd like to follow along, open your Bible. If not, we got it on the screen for you. And when you read through this, you get the impression that there's been a lot of changes occur, not only in the author, who is the Apostle Paul, not only in his life, but in the lives of those to whom he is writing. And chances are he actually never visited this actual church. This is probably one of his prison letters where he's writing from a distance to these Colossian Christians. But he drops some lines in this first chapter that just make so much sense to a first century world and a 21st century world, especially when a world is rapidly changing like ours. Like, what do we do and how do you and I step into change when change is inevitable and it's going to occur, but when it's occurring, or when we think it's about to occur, or it's been occurring for some time and it feels like things are just unstable, you're not at ease, and it feels like life is difficult, what do you do? Well, Paul writes in chapter 1, verse 28, he says, we proclaim him. And I love how that verse just starts. 3 simple words. We proclaim him. So to some readers who were feeling a little instability in their lives, and maybe life was difficult, and there were some shifts and changes occur that were really making an impact on how they thought about life, Paul says simply, we proclaim him. Due to innovation, sometimes we pivot. But the one constant, even though methods change, is the message. And that is the message of Christ. Any Lindsey Sterling fans in the house this morning? Yeah, all right, we've got 1, 2. Okay, good, 2 of us. So I didn't know who she was 3 or 4 years ago, but Michelle, she loves the violin, and Lindsey Sterling is a phenomenal violinist. Well, she's taken playing the violin to a whole new level. So she came to Rupp 3 days before Christmas, so an early Christmas present, I took Michelle to see Lindsey Sterling. So this is a picture of her, and she's in the air. Like, I've got some videos, and I tried to go through them and capture just a great spot, but this gal, she's actually in the air. And she does all these twists and turns, and she's got this one section where she's in this hula hoop and she's upside down. It's spinning, and she is going to town on this violin, just killing it with these Christmas songs. She's upside down, spinning twirling. Did you know she did that? I didn't either. So it's crazy what she's capable of. Well, right before the show starts, we go down, we get our seats. I was able to get some really cool seats, spend a little extra because it's Christmas. So we're sitting there, comfortable. Show starts in about 10 minutes. Michelle's like, hey, I want a bottle of water. And I'm like, oh, we've got those lines. You know how the lines at Rupp fill up a little bit. I'm like, oh, that's not going to work. But I'm like, she needs it. So I'm like, all right, I'll go. So I march up the stairs, and I go and I look for those typical kiosks where there's the registers and there's the people behind them. And you can see behind them, there's those elevated rows of pizza and hot dogs and popcorn. And I can't find them. They're gone. Instead, there's just this wall of like a freezer in a gas station when you go to the soda section, or that section where they've got those sandwiches that sometimes they're tempting, but you know they're probably not the best option for you. So you got those, and then the hot dogs, well, they're all in this little wall. And there's some shelves with popcorn and pizza. And then there's some refrigerated doors that you open for your drinks. And there's an entry point, and it's about 20 feet long. And there's an exit point. So you go over here, and I'm like, well, how do you get in? And there's a guy here, and there's a guy at the end. He's like, oh, swipe your card. I'm like, all right. So I swipe my card. I'm able to get in. Just go through there, pick out whatever I want. I come to the end. It says exit. I'm like, can I leave? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, well, like, how do you know what I got? How much this costs? So he was like, cameras. So I look up, and there's like 50 cameras just scanning us. So it's so simple. You tap your card, you go in, get what you want, walk the length, and you go out. That's it. Quick, change. My world was rocked. I don't know if you've been to Rupp since that's happened. That was my first experience with that. Totally different. I mean, wow. I didn't like it. It made me a little uncomfortable. It threw me back to like 1993 in a Wendy's parking lot where things just felt, what? This changes off. And what do? You proclaim him. And in that moment, I realized, you know what? It's all good. This is going to happen. And more than this is going to happen. And more, it's going to spread out even more. The world's changing. David, you're not here for this. You're here for the show. So go back, have your seat, and enjoy the show. That's what Paul is telling his readers. Things are changing. And even in the first century, when it comes to what they understood as following God, things were changing rapidly and quickly. So Paul writes to them, and it's like, it's all good. It's a little uncomfortable. It feels unstable. It's messing with you a little. But he's still the show. We proclaim him. And then he goes on, he says, we proclaim him. He goes on, verse 28. We proclaim him, admonishing and teaching everyone with all wisdom. Now, when Paul drops that word wisdom, there's a lot of depth there. I won't bore you with a lot of details, but just give you kind of the cliff notes of what you need to know. Paul was a Jewish guy, and he was a well-respected Pharisee. Okay? Paul was a well-respected Pharisee prior to becoming this just intense follower of Jesus, a well-respected Pharisee. And being a well-respected Pharisee, Paul had studied Jewish law in the strictest manner possible at the time, under one of the most skilled teachers. Now you put those two things together, how he studied Jewish law and being a well-respected Pharisee, those come together and they equaled an initial opposition against this grassroots movement initiated by Jesus. When you read early on in Paul's life, before his name was actually changed to Paul, you see that he was an antagonist toward what Jesus was articulating. Paul was against it. So when Paul drops this word wisdom, there's a lot of depth there. You can actually go back into what we call the Old Testament, and there's a cluster of Old Testament books. You know them as Psalms, Proverbs, Job, Song of Solomon or Song of Songs, and one more we'll get to in just a second. Those are what's known as wisdom literature. So if you order a book from Amazon or you go to Half Price Books or Barnes & Noble or wherever you shop for books and you want a book on Old Testament wisdom literature, you would get a book and it would focus on Psalms, Proverbs, Job, Song of Solomon or Song of Songs, and Ecclesiastes. That's wisdom literature. And in ancient Israel, wisdom was a really big deal. Wisdom was a high value item in ancient Israel because wisdom and the way of wisdom was a way of life. And it was a way of life that led to righteousness and success. It was a way that someone actually navigated through the instability or the uncertainty or the changes that occurred. Wisdom was where it was at. And when you read through Ecclesiastes, you see that the author is all about wisdom. Ecclesiastes was made popular in the mid-20th century by a group called the Byrds. Show of hands, who remembers that group? Times have changed. Not all of us remember that group. Some of us do, right? We grew up in homes where our parents liked it or whatever. So the Byrds made the song popular based on their song, Turn, Turn, Turn. To everything there is a season, turn, turn, turn. That was built around Ecclesiastes 3, where there's a time for everything. That's why this book is really well known. But I was doing some research on Ecclesiastes not too long ago, and one of the researchers said that the word wisdom is used 12 times in Ecclesiastes. And I thought, that's wrong. It's used way more than that. I know it is. So I get out my NIV and I'm in a Starbucks corner table and I open the Bible and I'm reading through Ecclesiastes and I'm searching, for the word wisdom, my own little check here. And it's more than 12, but it's less than 20, the word wisdom. More than 12, but less than 20 in the NIV that I was using. But then I remembered in the search seeing this one word, meaningless. In Ecclesiastes, the author uses the word meaningless over and over and over again. And there's only 12 chapters in the book of Ecclesiastes. Over and over and over was the word meaningless. So I go back to chapter 1 and I start scanning every chapter for this word meaningless. And in the NIV that I had, I counted 33 times. That's nearly 3 times per chapter the word meaningless is used. And often, multiple times, when the author uses the word meaningless, he also drops this phrase, it's a chasing after the wind. What's really interesting about this book is that Paul would have studied wisdom from this author. He would have understood the idea of wisdom and how it's contrasted with what is meaningless. So throughout 12 chapters, this author of Ecclesiastes said, I spent my time indulging, just self-indulgence with pleasure and vanity and knowledge and finances. And I realized that all of it was meaningless. It's like you're really chasing after the wind. And I don't know about you, but do you have any idiosyncrasies that are just kind of silly that you do when no one else is looking or no one else is around? Well, one of mine is on any cold morning. This is like a goal of mine. And if I ever do it, I will let you know, okay? One of my goals is when it's a cold morning and it's brisk and you can see your air when you breathe out and it's like all that. Does anybody else love to just toy with that? Blow it around and all that. All right, one of my goals is if you do it just right, you can go, make a circle. One of my goals is to make the Olympic sign. So, boom, boom. Now, I kid you not, I'm not bragging, but I've got the top 3 rings before. I've got the top 3 rings. I've never been able to get the bottom 2, okay? Completing that, I don't know if it's possible because once you're finishing that loop on the 3rd one, well, the first one, it's gone. It's fleeting. It's really like chasing the wind. So the author of Ecclesiastes said, I've reached the whole conclusion. And this is how he actually ends his wisdom literature book. Chapter 12, he says, here's what I've discovered. Everything you've been taught can be summed up in just a few words. Respect and obey God. That's what life is all about. And that was wisdom of the day. There's so much of life that is just meaningless. And the meaningless stuff is, unfortunately, where you and I often feel pressured to spend most of our time. So when a change happens, it does feel like it's making life difficult. It does feel unstable. This is messing with me. When really, nothing significant is actually even happening. Because you and I, we proclaim him. And we admonish and we teach others to do that with all wisdom. So the wisdom, it walks through life and it pushes everything that's meaningless to the side and focuses on what's important. That's why Paul would go on and say, and we do this so that we can present everyone in Christ. We can present them mature in Christ. They're growing up in this wisdom. They're understanding what it means to follow him, where to put their treasures, their time, their effort, their energy, their resources, what's most valuable. And then he drops this phrase, and I love it, and he says, to this end, I labor and I struggle because his energy is at work in me in a very powerful way. But he uses that word struggle, and this is really interesting. It's the same word that when we translate into struggle, it's the same root word as our English word agonize. Agonize. So Paul is saying, this is not easy. It's not a one and done deal. It's not like you do it, then it's over. There's some agony involved with this. There's a struggle. It's a wrestle when changes are happening and you feel it and you feel off. It's not always easy. Oh, great change. Woo. No, there's some emotion. There's some physical and mental duress or distress that occurs with this. So Paul is saying, I labor and I struggle with this. But what's interesting is that he doesn't say the struggle comes my way. He doesn't say it just happened. What's interesting is that he says, I actually wrestle with this. I'm part of creating the agony with this. Now, I want to confess something, and I'm not being funny, okay? Seriously. I've been taking some inventory of my driving lately. And I think I told you before about a couple of accidents and tried to qualify that, assuring you that I am a safe, good driver now, and all that's true. The point I'm talking about is I get irritated on the road easily and quickly. And I want to just get this out this morning in front of you. And I want to verbalize this, and not just in a prayer. I want to own this right now. And I've noticed the past week or two, I've just been doing some personal inventory, some introspection. And there's some days I get up and I go to a 4-way stop. And it's crazy. It's amazing that we can put a man on the moon. And we have the internet where I can literally take my phone and send a picture from my phone to your phone through the air. But you put people at a 4-way stop and all intellect just breaks down. The human capacity just goes out the window. But there are some days I come to a four-way stop and it's not going well, and I'm good. And then there are some days I get up and I go to a four-way stop and it's not going well, and I'm not good. It bothers me. There's agony going on. I'm agonizing about this on the road. And sometimes I'm on the interstate and people are weaving in, and when they weave into my lane, it bothers me. And when they weave out and I speed up to go around them because I don't like the way they're driving, and I see they're on their phone, I lose it. It bothers me. But over time, I don't like the way I feel in those moments. But here's what I've discovered. Tell me if you can relate. Here's what I've discovered. This is why I can't get over it. And I'm not joking. I think there's a distorted, broken, rebellious part of David Green that likes that agony a little. Some of you get me, don't you? I like the drama. I like being upset. I like feeling frustrated. We're connecting as humans now, aren't we? You get me? There's a part of me that doesn't want to let it go, because then what? I like holding on to that. I agonize about it. I'm participating in this. This is what Paul would say in Romans 7. And I think this comes from the NLT. Listen if you can connect with Paul as a human. Same guy who's proclaiming him with wisdom. Same guy who's writing Colossians 1. He says, the trouble is with me. That's the trouble with me, because I'm all too human. I don't really understand myself, for I want to do what is right, but I don't do it. Instead, do you know what I do? I do what I hate. You ever been there? But if I know that what I'm doing is wrong, this shows I agree that the law's good. I'm not the one doing it. I guess it's that sin that's living in me that does it. And I know that nothing good lives in me. That's my sinful nature, because I want to do what is right, but I can't. I want to do what is good, but I don't. I don't know what to do. I don't want to do what is wrong, but I do it anyway. You ever been there? There's a part of me that gets that on such a deep level. I know what that means. So Paul is saying there's agony with this. There's a struggle with helping people sort out wisdom. There's a difficulty that comes with preaching and honoring and proclaiming him, regardless of the life's difficulties, regardless of the changes. I think that's why Henry Cloud, in his book, Necessary Endings, writes some of the most profound words. And Henry Cloud's a Christian therapist. He's a phenomenal speaker and a writer. So he's coming from a shared background with us as Jesus as Lord. But listen to these words. He says, somewhere along the line, and I bet you and I, we could probably pinpoint where, somewhere along the line, we just haven't been equipped with the discernment or the courage or the skills necessary to initiate, follow through, and complete necessary endings. We're not prepared to go where we need to go. So we do not clearly see the need to end something. Or we maintain false hope. Or we're just not able to do what needs to be done. And as a result, we stay stuck in what should now be our past. I read some results of a little research study that the results are things that you and I know. At the end of a year, the beginning of a new year, around 38% of people are going to craft some kind of New Year's resolution. 9% of those people will keep them. Now here's the caveat. Out of those 9, 23% will last the first week. Then the rest, they're done by February. Change is difficult. It's not just that life is filled with difficulties, it's that the change makes life feel so difficult. That's probably why Paul in later letters and other letters to the churches would write something like this in 1 Corinthians 13. When I was a child, I talked like a child, of course. I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child, but when I became an adult, I took those childish ways and I put them over here. I set them aside. Or he'd write to the church at Philippi and he would say, here's the one thing I do. This is the thing that seems to make all the difference in the world. I forget the past. I let it go. And I strain toward what is ahead. And I bet he says, I strain toward what is ahead because I'm able to let go of the past and leave it in my rear view mirror. What about you? Are you good with those two things? Have you been able to set some of this stuff that you know as well as I do when I'm at a four-way stop, that you're the problem? Are you able to set that aside? Are you able to let go and put the stuff that needs to be in your past in the past? Well, Paul had finished up this little section, and here's kind of the caveat or the bolstering point of where Paul is going with this whole thing. Paul talks about God forgiving us of our sins, and he's actually canceled the written code with its regulations. And then he drops this line. Those regulations, those written codes, that Jewish law that we've always studied, that wisdom from the old covenant has a new meaning when you're following Jesus. Things have shifted. They've changed because it was against us. And that stood opposed to us. So what did God do? Well, through his Son, everything that's standing against you, opposing you, that is against you, he took it away and he nailed that to the cross. I think Paul's saying to these first century people who are experiencing some change in what they need to believe in and how they need to proclaim him, he's saying, there's a new payment method. God is accepting a new way of paying for this stuff that is against you and opposed to you. God is accepting a new way of payment for your sins and for the things that are rebellious and broken inside of you. So here's what I want us to do. Last night, there was a youth lock-in, and we had about 20 show up. It was fantastic. And so around 11:30, we all got out around a bonfire. And I was thinking we would do something similar, but I thought, I don't know. We've got new incoming elders. If I put a fire up here on the stage, is that a good first run for them? What do you do with that? And is there any firemen here? Is that a fire code? Is it okay to put a fire up here? No, I didn't think so either. So we got around the fire, and what we did is everybody took just a small piece of paper, and they wrote one word that was to capture a characteristic, a quality, something that represents something going on in their lives that they want to leave in 2024 and not take into 2025. One word. Then they were to fold that, and then when they were ready, they were to stand up, toss it in the fire, and burn that. They were going to be done with it. And it got a little emotional for some. Some got really excited that they were able to do this. Some got a little introspective and turned inward and really started thinking about what this does mean in their life and all the reasons they want to leave it behind. So here's what I want us to do. I'm going to put these stacks of paper right over here. And I want you to go ahead and start thinking about your word. A word that represents something that maybe that should have been in your past a long, long time ago. But it's been showing up a lot lately. And the only thing you know is that you do not want to take that into 2025. Or there's this childish way about you, and you know it. You feel it, and you've never been able to set it aside, and it's been showing up lately. And I want you to use this as a moment to set that aside. Or there's some stuff that you've just not been able to let go of. Well, we're told from Paul that there's been a lot of stuff that we hold on to that's already been dealt with. It's been nailed to the cross of Jesus Christ. So I want you to think about your word. And there should be a pen in the chair in front of you. I want you to take that pen, and then I want you to come up here. And I want you to write that word. And instead of burning it, I want you to take your paper and fold it, or crumple it, or just rip it up and just toss it. We're just going to leave our mess right there, because all this stuff has already been dealt with. Now it's your opportunity to accept that. And I'm going to go first. And the person who follows me, you can have this book, because I know some of you have a really hard time with stuff that needs to end. You have a really hard time with making it end. This is a fantastic book about how to make necessary endings that end, and it'll walk you through it. And I want you to come up here, and I don't want you to miss this moment. In October, we did a series called Haunted House, and every week we would meet at the cross and we would pray. And I had some people talk to me afterward, and they say, you know what? I wanted so badly to walk up there, but I didn't. And I so regret that. You need this moment more than he does. His moment was 2,000 years ago on the real cross with his real son. You need this moment, because that stuff's going to show up maybe first week 2025, or maybe it'll catch you in February. So this moment is for you to accept what he has already done in your life. Ready?